The arena was wide and deep, built from black stone that rose high into the alien sky, its walls glowing with strange blue veins of energy, and the sound of the crowd echoed like thunder rolling through a canyon, all voices mixing into one heavy noise of fear and excitement, because tonight the beast would rise again. Tonight the trial would be held. The beast waited inside the iron gates, its massive shape hidden by shadow, and every alien in the stands could feel the ground shake as it moved. They whispered of its power. They whispered of its hunger. They whispered that no warrior had ever walked out alive once the gates opened, and still they came to watch, because to see fear and death was its own kind of thrill for them. The council of elders sat above all others, their eyes cold, their robes heavy with gold and black. They were the keepers of the tradition, and they declared that the beast must face a challenger, that only through combat could the test be completed. And the voice of the herald rose loud, asking who would step forward, asking who had courage, asking who had strength enough to face the monster. Silence fell like a heavy blanket over the entire arena, a silence so strong that the crowd seemed to shrink into itself. No alien moved, no alien spoke. They lowered their heads, they pulled their cloaks tight. They prayed the herald would not see them, because every species knew the truth. To face the beast was to die, and no one wanted to be chosen. The gates rattled and shook. The beast roared once, a deep sound that cracked the air like thunder breaking the sky, and the silence became terror. Aliens clutched each other, their skin pale, their many eyes or horns or wings trembling, all of them waiting for someone else to take the burden. But no one stood, no one dared. Then from the back of the crowd, from the shadows of the lower tiers, a figure began to move, slow and steady, footsteps echoing against the stone. Every eye turned, every alien gasped, because it was not a warrior of their kind. It was not one of the giant armored lizards, nor the insect folk with blade arms, nor the winged hunters of the high moons. It was something smaller, something weaker. It was a human. The human walked with no armor, only cloth wrapped around his body. No weapon but a simple blade strapped to his side, his face calm, his eyes steady. He did not hide. He did not tremble. And as he reached the open circle before the arena floor, the murmurs of the crowd rose in waves. Some laughed, some cursed, some whispered that madness had taken him. Others whispered of strange stories they had heard, stories that humans were not like the others, that humans had something else inside them. The council looked down, their voices harsh and cold, asking if the human truly wished to face the beast, reminding him that no one had survived, reminding him that this was no place for games. And yet the human bowed his head once and spoke with quiet strength, his voice clear in the silence, saying that he would fight, saying that he would step forward when all others hid. The crowd gasped again. Some cried out for him to stop. Some shouted that it was foolishness. But the gates of the beast rattled once more, the iron bars glowing with heat, the ground trembling, and the choice was sealed. The human would stand alone. In that moment the sky above the arena seemed darker. The torches burned brighter, and the sound of the beast inside the gate grew louder, claws striking stone, heavy breath shaking the air, and the fear of the crowd mixed with something else now, a strange feeling that they had not known before, a curiosity, a question, a thought that maybe this time would not be the same as before. The human placed his hand on the hilt of his blade, his eyes locked on the gate, his body steady, no sign of fear, no sign of retreat. And in the silence before the storm, as the gates began to rise, every alien in the arena leaned forward, their hearts racing, their voices held back, waiting to see if the fragile creature who dared to step forward would be crushed in a breath, or if something different was about to begin. And as the gates opened fully, the beast came forth, its body massive, its scales black like stone, its eyes burning like molten fire, its claws scraping sparks from the ground, and its roar rose again, filling the air with the sound of death itself. But still the human did not move away. Still he stood, small against the giant shadow, and the entire arena held its breath, because in that moment, for the first time in memory, a challenger had come not from the strong, not from the mighty, but from the species they had all thought weak, a human who dared to face the beast when no one else would. The council chamber above the arena shone with silver light. The elders sat on high thrones carved from ancient stone, their eyes narrow and filled with cold judgment, and as the roar of the beast echoed through the arena walls, their voices began to rise in debate, sharp words cutting the air, words about the human, words about why he should not be there. One elder spoke with a voice that carried heavy weight, saying the human was a fragile species, saying their bones were light, their muscles thin, their skin weak, and that no human should ever be placed before the beast, for it was not courage but foolishness, not bravery but madness, and all who watched would see the end come swiftly. Yet another elder leaned forward, her eyes sharp, and she spoke of whispers. She spoke of strange records from the edge of the stars, tales that humans survived, where others fell, tales that they endured things beyond measure, and her words made the chamber stir with unease. Down below, the crowd of thousands still murmured, alien voices rising like a wave of sound, some mocking, some pitying, some whispering of wagers placed on how quickly the human would fall. The insect folk clicked their mandibles in cruel laughter. The scaled warriors hissed with scorn. The feathered tribes covered their eyes in sorrow, for they thought this small creature would surely be torn apart. But still they watched, unable to look away, for curiosity was stronger than comfort, and the human had stepped where none dared step. The human himself stood calm, his back straight, his breathing steady, his gaze fixed on the gate where the beast had already roared, and while fear sat heavy in the hearts of all others, there was no fear in his stance, there was no hesitation in his step, and this puzzled the watchers, for every species knew the grip of fear, every species knew the taste of dread, but here stood one who seemed to hold none of it, and that very absence was terrifying in its own way. The herald raised his staff, his voice booming across the wide stone walls, declaring that the challenge had been accepted, declaring that the beast would now be met, declaring that the human had chosen his fate, and the gates shook as the locks fell, iron scraping against stone, dust falling like mist as the path opened, and out from the darkness came the sound of claws dragging heavy across the floor, a slow sound, a cruel sound, a sound that promised death. The crowd leaned forward, their many eyes and faces lit by firelight, watching as the shadow grew larger, and then the beast stepped into the arena, massive and black, its scales glowing faint with heat, its jaws dripping with smoke, its eyes burning bright like molten iron, and the ground trembled as it moved, each step cracking stone, each breath filling the air with fire and ash, and yet still the human did not step back. Still he stood in place, one hand resting lightly on the hilt of his blade, his other hand clenched at his side, his eyes locked steady on the monster before him. The council watched, their whispers sharp and heavy, one elder muttering that the human was mad, another warning that this would stain the council with shame, for sending such a weak creature to certain death would prove the cruelty of their law. But the eldest of them all raised his hand and silenced them, saying that the law was clear, saying that any who stepped forward must be allowed to face the beast. And though doubt filled his voice, though unease crept through the chamber, the law was the law, and none could change it now. The beast sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring with smoke, its gaze falling on the small figure before it, and a low growl rumbled from its throat, shaking the stone beneath them, a sound that had broken the courage of 100 warriors before. But the human did not flinch, he did not tremble, he only raised his chin higher, and though the crowd shouted for him to flee, though they cried out that he must run, he only stood taller, as if rooted to the earth itself. The first strike came without warning, a flash of black claws, sparks flying as they ripped across the stone, and the dust rose in a choking cloud. The crowd gasped, voices rising in horror, certain the human had been shredded in an instant. But then, as the dust cleared, there he was alive, standing just to the side, his clothes torn, his skin scraped, but his body still steady, and the crowd roared in disbelief, their voices rising like thunder, for never before had a challenger avoided the first strike of the beast. The elders sat in silence, their faces dark, for they too had never seen such a thing. They leaned forward, eyes narrow, trying to understand, and one of them whispered the truth aloud, saying the human had not moved in panic, saying the human had moved with purpose, that it was no blind luck but calculation, the kind of calculation that came not from instinct but from practice. And this truth made them uneasy, because if the human had studied, if the human had planned, then perhaps this fight would not be the same as the fights before. The beast roared again, furious, its massive tail whipping across the arena, smashing stone pillars into shards, dust filling the air once more. But still the human moved with strange timing, dodging, weaving, never rushing, never stumbling, as if he had measured the beast's rhythm, as if he had learned its steps in the few short breaths since it had emerged. And the more he moved, the more the crowd fell into shocked silence, their laughter gone, their jeers forgotten, replaced only with wide eyes and pounding hearts. The human drew his blade, the steel flashing in the firelight, and though it looked small against the giant shadow before him, though it looked like a toy in the face of death, he held it with a grip that was steady and strong, and in that grip was a message that every alien could feel, that the weapon itself was less important than the will of the one who held it, and that will was stronger than the roar of the beast itself. The fight was not yet decided, the danger was not yet past, but in that moment a change had come, a shift in the air, for the crowd no longer looked at the human with only pity or mockery. Now they looked with fear, now they looked with awe, now they looked with the first stirrings of belief that something impossible might be happening before their very eyes, that the weak might not be weak at all, that the small might hold a strength greater than size, that perhaps the stories, whispered at the edges of the stars, were not just stories, but truth. And as the beast lowered its massive head, smoke pouring from its jaws, preparing to strike again with fury greater than before, the human only stood taller, his eyes locked, his voice silent, his body ready. And in that stillness, in that calm, in that steady defiance, the entire arena felt something they had never felt before. Not fear, not dread, but the heavy weight of a question that none could answer. The question of why this human was here at all, and what truth they were about to learn from him. The arena shook as the beast lowered its head, smoke pouring from its vast jaws, its breath hot enough to burn the stone beneath its feet. The crowd of thousands fell into a silence so deep that even the beating of wings and the rustling of scales could not be heard. All eyes were fixed on the small human who stood at the center, blade drawn, body steady, his frame so tiny beside the mountain of black flesh and fire. Yet he did not retreat, he did not tremble, he did not even blink as the beast prepared to strike. With a roar that shattered the silence and cracked the sky above, the beast surged forward, claws tearing through the air with speed impossible for its size. The ground split beneath its weight, and the shockwave of its charge knocked stones loose from the high walls. Many in the crowd screamed, certain that this would be the end, certain that the human would be crushed in one blow like every challenger before him. But the human's feet moved with perfect timing, a sidestep so quick it seemed almost unreal, his body sliding past the strike with the grace of water slipping around a rock, and the claws missed him by a breath. Dust rose, choking in thick, the ground trembling as the claws carved deep trenches in the arena floor, sparks leaping where stone gave way, and for a heartbeat the human vanished inside the cloud. The audience gasped, hearts pounding, eyes straining, until the dust parted just enough to reveal him again, alive, untouched, standing at the very edge of the crater left by the blow, his eyes sharp, his blade gleaming faintly in the firelight. The beast turned with fury, its massive tail swinging in a wide arc, smashing a stone pillar into fragments that rained down like meteors. But again the human moved, ducking low, rolling aside, shards cutting his arms and face, blood trickling, yet still his grip on the blade remained firm. And as he rose to his feet he looked at the monster with no hint of despair, no cry for mercy, only a quiet focus, as if every move of the beast was a lesson to be studied, as if every strike was a puzzle, waiting to be solved. The council above leaned forward, their eyes narrow, their whispers sharp. They could not deny what they had seen, for this was no wild panic, no desperate scramble. This was control, this was timing. This was the kind of precision that no other challenger had ever shown, and one elder whispered that the human was not fighting like prey. He was fighting like a hunter, and those words spread like fire through the chamber, filling the elders with unease. The beast roared again, louder now, its frustration clear, for it was a creature that had known only victory, a predator born to destroy. Yet here stood a tiny being who refused to fall, who moved like smoke, who slipped away again and again, and the beast's eyes blazed brighter. Its steps heavier, its strikes faster. Yet the human kept moving, dodging, weaving, using the broken stone around him as cover, sliding behind shattered columns, springing from cracks in the ground. Every piece of the arena became part of his fight. Every fragment of ruin became a tool for survival. The crowd began to change, their fear turning into something else. For at first, they had only waited for the human to die. But now they leaned forward, their voices rising in disbelief. Gasps and cries filling the air with every dodge, every escape, every moment where the impossible became real. And though none dared speak it aloud, the thought grew inside them all. The thought that perhaps the beast had found something it had never faced before. The human's blade flashed for the first time. A quick strike against the beast's foreleg, the steel scraping against the black scale, sparks bursting as if he had struck iron. The cut shallow, almost nothing, yet it left a line of silver against the dark hide. Proof that the monster could be touched, proof that it was not untouchable. And the arena erupted with shouts and cries, voices of shock and wonder, voices that carried fear but also something else, something like hope. The beast bellowed in rage, smoke and fire bursting from its jaws, its head sweeping low in an attempt to crush the human beneath sheer weight. Stones shattered as it struck the floor, flames licking across the arena, and many in the crowd shielded their eyes from the blast. Yet when the fire cleared, the human was still there, crouched behind a broken column, his skin scorched, his breath heavy, but alive, and his blade still in his hand, glinting faintly like a star in the smoke. The council chambers shook with the roar, elders gripping the arms of their thrones, one shouting that it was impossible, another whispering that it was madness. Yet all of them could not turn away, their eyes locked on the sight below, their voices choked with disbelief. For the human was breaking the pattern. The human was surviving the first clash, something no other challenger had done. And with each breath he drew, with each step he took, their certainty cracked, their law trembled there. Faith in the invincibility of the beast began to waver. The human's body was bleeding now, shallow cuts across his arms, smoke burns across his chest, his hair singed, sweat pouring down his face. But his eyes still burned with fire, his breathing steady, his stance unbroken. And though his body was fragile, though his flesh was weak, there was something inside him that shone brighter than the flames around him, a will that refused to bend, a strength that had nothing to do with size or muscle, a power born of stubbornness, of endurance, of the refusal to surrender. The beast reared back, preparing to strike again, its claws raised high. The crowd screamed, the elders leaned forward, and the human tightened his grip, his feet shifting, his body lowering into a stance of readiness, his gaze sharp, his voice silent but his will clear. And in that moment the clash was no longer a contest between predator and prey. It was something else, something greater. It was the meeting of raw power against raw spirit, destruction against defiance, and the arena itself seemed to hold its breath. The roar came again, the claws descended, the ground split wide, and dust filled the air. But when it cleared, the human was not broken. The human was not gone. The human was still there, standing in the shadow of the beast, smaller than a child before a mountain, yet stronger than any giant in that single instant. And the crowd could not believe, the council could not deny, and even the beast itself seemed to pause, as if for the first time it had met something it did not understand. And so the first clash ended not in death, not in defeat, but in the rising truth that the fight would be different this time, that the arena would remember this night forever, and that the name human would no longer be spoken with pity or scorn, but with awe. For the first clash had shown them all that there was something in this fragile creature that no one had ever seen before, something that even the beast itself could not crush so easily. The air of the arena was heavy with smoke and dust. The crowd sat frozen as if time itself had paused, their voices caught in their throats, their eyes wide with disbelief, for they had all seen the impossible. The human had faced the first clash and still stood, battered and bleeding but unbroken, and this moment carried a weight greater than any trial before, because now every alien heart beat with the same question: what secret allowed this fragile creature to stand where all others had fallen? The beast roared again, its voice shaking the walls, its fury rising like fire through the sky. And with that fury came a storm of violence, claw slashing, jaw snapping, tail smashing through the stone like a hammer of war. Yet the human kept moving, weaving between strikes, rolling beneath the crushing tail, leaping aside when the jaws snapped inches from his body, his blade flashing whenever the smallest opening appeared, leaving thin silver lines across the scales of the monster, shallow wounds that barely marked its hide but carried a deeper meaning, a meaning that the beast was not invincible, a meaning that even a giant could bleed. The elders above whispered in disbelief, their voices sharp and trembling. One cried that it was luck, another hissed that it was trickery, but one leaned forward with a gaze heavy as iron, saying it was not luck, saying it was not chance. It was survival. It was instinct carved from hardship. It was the strength of a species that lived on a world of storms and hunger and endless struggle, a world that taught them to fight not with power but with endurance. And those words made the chamber fall, silent, because they felt true in their bones. The human's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, sweat running into his eyes, blood dripping down his arm, yet his stance never wavered, his focus never faltered. And as the beast circled with anger, the human used everything around him. Broken columns became shields, loose stones became weapons thrown to distract, cracks in the ground became traps to trip the monster's heavy feet, and every move spoke of a mind that refused to waste a single chance, a will that turned weakness into strength, a spirit that would not die quietly. The crowd slowly began to change. Their jeers turned to silence, their silence turned to gasps, and their gasps turned to cries of awe. For though the human strikes were small, though his blade cut only shallow marks, every drop of blood drawn from the beast felt like a victory greater than any before. Every dodge, every roll, every counter-strike showed not just skill but resilience, the kind of resilience that no other species had shown, because when others would collapse, when others would surrender, this human pressed on. The beast grew angrier with each wound, each missed strike, its body lashing out with blind rage, its roars echoing so loud that dust fell from the high walls. But rage brought mistakes, and mistakes were what the human hunted. Step by step, he forced the monster into corners. Breath by breath, he read its rhythm, and cut by cut, he began to shape the fight into something new. Not a contest of brute power, but a test of will. Not a display of destruction, but a battle of endurance. And in endurance, the human was unmatched. The council above leaned forward, their voices low, one elder finally whispering that they understood now, that the human's weapon was not the blade, not the speed, not even the tricks of the environment. The human's true weapon was refusal, refusal to fall, refusal to quit, refusal to break no matter how deep the wound, no matter how heavy the blow. And this truth spread like fire through their thoughts, because it meant that the beast, for all its strength, was facing an enemy it could not understand. The human staggered once, knees buckling from a glancing blow that sent pain shooting through his ribs, blood staining the sand beneath him, and the crowd gasped, certain this was the end. But slowly, impossibly, he rose again, his blade lifting once more, his eyes still burning, and that sight alone sent a chill through every watcher, because they realized that for the human defeat did not exist. For him there was only forward, only one more breath, one more strike, one more step, until the very end. The beast roared in fury, charging with all its might, its claws tearing at the ground as it sought to crush him once and for all. The arena floor cracked beneath the weight, yet the human did not flee. Instead he moved toward the monster, a blur of motion that seemed madness but carried purpose, and as the claw descended, he rolled inside its reach, his blade flashing, cutting deep into the softer flesh beneath the joint of the leg. And for the first time the beast howled in true pain, stumbling back, its massive body shaking as blood sprayed into the dust. The arena erupted, voices crying out, some with horror, some with awe, some with disbelief, but all united in the shock that the human had done what no one thought possible. He had made the beast falter, he had made the beast stumble, and the entire arena trembled with the weight of this new truth. The beast could be hurt, and the one who had shown it was the smallest, the weakest, the most fragile challenger of all. The human staggered too, his body heavy with pain, his strength fading, but his spirit burned brighter than ever, his eyes never leaving the monster, his hands gripping the blade so tight that his knuckles turned white. and he whispered words that none could hear, words meant only for himself, words that carried his promise that he would not fall until the beast itself fell, and the crowd could feel the weight of that vow in their hearts, even if they could not hear the sound. The council sat in silence now, their voices gone, their pride shaken, their certainty broken, because the human had revealed something none of them had wanted to see. That power without will is hollow, that strength without endurance is fragile, that courage born of fear is nothing beside courage born of defiance. And the longer they watched, the deeper that truth carved into their thoughts, until they could no longer deny that this fragile creature carried a strength unlike any other. The beast snarled, blood dripping from its wound, eyes blazing with hatred, and it lowered its head again, preparing for another strike. But in the eyes of the crowd, in the hearts of the council, something had already changed. For now, when they looked at the human, they no longer saw weakness. They no longer saw fragility. They saw a being who had turned survival into an art, who had taken suffering and made it into strength, who had shown them a hidden power that none had believed existed, the hidden strength of humanity. And as the human raised his blade once more, standing against the shadow of the monster, small yet unbroken, fragile yet unstoppable, the entire arena leaned forward in silence, because they knew the fight was not yet decided. But they also knew that from this moment on the beast was no longer the only legend within these walls, for the human too had become a story that would be told across stars, a story of how the smallest creature revealed the greatest strength of all. The ground trembled beneath the beast as it circled, blood dripping in heavy drops from the wound carved into its leg, smoke curling from its nostrils, rage burning in its molten eyes. The crowd held its breath, thousands of voices silenced, as if the air itself had been stolen, for they had all seen the impossible. They had all seen the beast stagger. They had all seen the human draw true blood, and in that moment the tide of the battle had shifted, though none dared to speak it aloud. The human stood low, shoulders shaking, breath coming heavy and ragged, his chest burned from fire, his skin torn by stone, his blood marking the sand in dark trails. Yet his stance remained firm, his blade held tight, his eyes locked on the giant shadow before him, and in those eyes burned a light that no wound could dim, the light of one who refused to surrender, the light of one who had chosen to fight until the last breath. The beast roared, a sound so loud that the sky above seemed to crack, the pillars of the arena rattled, dust falling like rain, and with its fury came another charge, its claws ripping through the earth, its tail smashing apart broken columns, its head lowering to crush the human beneath raw power. The crowd screamed in terror, certain the fight would end in an instant. Yet the human moved again, his body slipping aside with desperate precision, rolling into the shadow of a cracked wall, and, when the beast struck the stone, the wall collapsed upon it, burying part of its body in rubble. For the first time the crowd erupted not in fear but in awe, their voices rising like thunder, cries of disbelief and wonder echoing through the vast chamber. And many among them shouted that the human had tricked the beast, that the human had used the arena itself as a weapon, something no other challenger had ever attempted, for all before had fought with raw force and failed, while this one fought with cunning and survived. The council above leaned forward, their robes heavy, their faces pale, their whispers sharp. One elder muttered that this was blasphemy, that no creature should use tricks against the sacred trial, but another spoke with trembling voice, saying that perhaps this was not trickery at all. Perhaps this was wisdom. Perhaps the human was showing them what strength truly meant, and their voices fell silent again as the beast roared once more, tearing itself free from the rubble, its eyes blazing with even greater fury. The human staggered from his cover, coughing from the dust, his body weakened, his limbs trembling, yet his grip on the blade remained sure, his eyes never leaving the monster. And as he stood there, battered yet unyielding, the crowd saw something they had never seen before. They saw the beast hesitate. If only for a moment, they saw the monster recognize its enemy not as prey, but as a foe. The fight grew more violent. The beast lashed out with wild fury, its claws striking faster, its tail whipping harder, flames pouring from its jaws, and every strike shook the ground, broke the stone, shattered the walls. Yet the human kept moving, battered but alive, bleeding but standing, and each time he dodged, each time he rose, he struck back with his blade, cutting again and again at the weaker joints of the beast. Shallow wounds piling upon shallow wounds until the black scales glistened with streaks of silver and red. The crowd could no longer stay silent. Their voices rose in waves, cries of disbelief, cries of awe, some even cheering. For though many still believed the human would fall, though many still thought the end inevitable, they could not deny what they were witnessing. They could not deny the truth unfolding before them, that the human had pushed the beast further than any challenger before, that the human had endured longer than all others, and that every strike he landed carried the promise of something greater, the promise that the impossible might yet be possible. The beast roared louder, shaking off pain, and in its rage it struck with a force that split the ground wide open, a crack tearing across the arena floor like lightning splitting the sky. The human was thrown back, his body rolling across the sand, his blade nearly slipping from his hand, his breath leaving his chest in a painful gasp. And for a moment the crowd believed it was over. For a moment despair filled their hearts once again. But then slowly, painfully, the human rose, his knees buckling, his body screaming with pain. Yet he stood, and he lifted his blade once more. The arena thundered with voices now, not in mockery, not in jeers, but in something new, something raw, a mixture of fear and belief. The aliens who had once laughed now watched with eyes wide. The ones who had pitied now felt their own hearts burn with a strange fire, and even the council above could not hide their unease. For they had thought the human fragile, they had thought him weak, but now they saw a strength that had nothing to do with muscle or size, a strength born of will alone, and it terrified them. The beast lowered its head again, preparing for a final crushing blow, smoke pouring from its jaws, its claws raised high, and the human staggered forward, his steps uneven but his eyes sharp. He did not flee. He did not falter. Instead, he lured the beast toward a broken section of the floor, a place where cracks ran deep, where the ground was weak from the strikes before, and when the beast charged, the human leapt aside at the last instant, rolling across the sand as the monster's weight crashed down upon the weakened ground. The floor gave way, stone collapsing, the beast stumbling as one leg sank deep into the crack, its massive body thrown off balance. And before it could recover, before it could rise, the human surged forward with every ounce of strength left in his broken frame, his blade flashing like a shard of lightning, driving deep into the exposed flesh near the beast's eye, the steel cutting where the scales were thin, and the monster howled with pain so fierce that the arena itself seemed to tremble too. Its foundations, blood poured, smoke erupted, the beast staggered back, shaking its head violently, its roar filled with fury and agony, its body unsteady, its movements broken, and the crowd erupted with cries louder than any before, their voices rising like a storm, for they had seen the impossible. They had seen the human wound the beast in a place that mattered. They had seen the giant falter in a way it never had, and in that instant they understood. The battle was no longer hopeless. The balance had shifted. The tide had turned. The human collapsed to one knee, his body trembling, his blade heavy in his hands, blood dripping from his wounds, sweat pouring into his eyes. But when he looked up, when he saw the beast reeling, when he heard the cries of the crowd, he smiled through the pain, a faint, broken smile, but one filled with fire, and that smile carried across the arena. That smile spoke louder than any roar, louder than any word. It told the crowd that the human had not come here to die. He had come here to win. And in that moment, as the beast roared in fury and pain, as the human rose once more with his blade ready, the arena knew that history was changing. The sacred trial was no longer what it had been, for the human had forced the beast to stumble. The human had shown that victory was possible, and the turning point had come. The beast roared in agony, its voice shaking the very bones of the arena, smoke and fire pouring from its jaws as it stumbled across the broken floor, its massive claws dragging deep scars into the stone, its great tail smashing against the walls in fury. The crowd trembled beneath the echo of that rage. Many cried out in fear, many covered their faces, yet none could look away, because the impossible was unfolding before their eyes. The beast was wounded, the beast was staggering, and the one who had done it was the human, who should have fallen long ago. The human was on one knee, his chest heaving, his breath ragged, his blood dripping onto the cracked ground. Every inch of his body screamed with pain, his bones bruised, his muscles torn, yet his hand still gripped the blade. His eyes still burned with fire, and as he forced himself to rise again, slowly, painfully, trembling but unyielding, the crowd gasped in disbelief, for they had never seen such stubbornness. They had never seen such refusal. They had never seen a being so broken yet so unwilling to stop. The elders above leaned forward, their robes heavy, their voices hushed. One elder muttered that this was madness, that the human should collapse, that no creature could endure such punishment. But another whispered with a trembling voice that perhaps this was not madness at all. Perhaps this was the essence of the human spirit, a will that did not understand surrender, a will that turned weakness into defiance. And their words made the chamber fall silent, for though they did not want to admit it, they could see the truth in the battered figure below. The beast lowered its head again, blood dripping from its wounded eye, smoke spilling from its nostrils like storm clouds, and with a furious snarl it charged, claws raised, jaws open wide to tear the human apart. The ground shook as it moved, cracks splitting further beneath its massive weight, and the crowd screamed once more, certain that the human would be crushed this time, certain that even his strange endurance would not save him. But the human moved, staggering to the side, rolling across the sand, his body scraping against stone, his breath sharp with pain, and yet he rose again, his blade still in his hands, his eyes still locked on the monster. The fight became a storm, the beast striking again and again with fury, its claws smashing, its tail whipping, its fire burning, and every strike left new wounds on the human. Every strike painted the sand with more blood. Yet still he refused to fall. Still he rose after every blow. Still he lifted his blade. And each time he rose the crowd cried louder, their voices mixing with disbelief and awe, their fear slowly turning into something else, something that felt like hope. The human's body was failing. His steps faltered. His limbs trembled. But his will grew only stronger. His spirit burned brighter with every breath. And the more he refused to stop, the more the beast grew frustrated. The more the beast struck in anger rather than precision, the more mistakes it made. And the human, though broken, though bleeding, used every mistake, every opening, carving more shallow cuts across its hide, turning pain into opportunity, turning suffering into strength. The council above could no longer speak, their faces pale, their hands trembling against the arms of their thrones, for they were seeing something that shattered their understanding. They had always believed that strength was muscle, that power was dominance, that victory was decided by size and force. Yet here was a fragile being proving them wrong. Here was a human showing them that true power came not from the body, but from the will. And it terrified them because it meant their laws, their traditions, their beliefs were built upon a lie. The beast roared again, swinging its massive head, the force throwing the human across the arena, his body slamming into a broken pillar, the sound of cracking bone echoing through the chamber. The crowd cried out in horror, certain that the end had come. Yet slowly, impossibly, the human began to move. His arm bent, his ribs shattered, blood filling his mouth, yet his hand still clung to the blade. His legs still pushed against the ground, and with a strength that defied reason he rose again, broken but standing, weak but unyielding, and the crowd erupted with cries that shook the air. Because no one had ever risen after such a blow, no one but him. The beast froze for a moment, its blazing eyes fixed on the small figure below, and in that silence the impossible truth became clear. The beast was uncertain, the beast who had known only victory, who had crushed every challenger before, now faced something it could not understand, a foe who did not quit, a foe who rose again and again no matter how many times it was struck down, and that uncertainty made the monster falter, its roar carrying not only fury now but confusion, and that sound sent shivers through the crowd. The human stood there, body broken, spirit unbroken, his blade lifted once more, his face pale, his breath heavy, but his eyes burning with a light that could not be extinguished, and the crowd, who once mocked, who once pitted, now found themselves shouting, voices of 1,000 species rising together, some crying his name, some crying words of belief, for they had seen what none could deny. They had seen the truth that the human would not stop, that the human could not stop, that the human's will was stronger than the beast's power. The elders sat in silence, their hearts heavy, their pride broken, for they knew what this meant. They knew that their trial had been revealed for what it was, not a test of power, but a test of will. And in that test the beast was no longer the ruler. The human was, and though they did not want to accept it, though their voices trembled with denial, their eyes could not look away from the truth before them. The beast roared in rage, charging once more, its body blazing with fury, its claws tearing the earth apart. But the human did not run. The human did not flee. He stepped forward, his body shaking, his blood dripping, yet his spirit blazing. And as the monster struck, he met it head-on, rolling beneath the claws, leaping upon its wounded leg, climbing with sheer will, his blade cutting deep into the flesh, his body battered by every movement, yet his grip unyielding, his will stronger than steel. The crowd rose to their feet, their voices a storm, their hearts pounding with a mix of terror and awe, for they were witnessing not just a fight, but a truth revealed, a truth that strength was not size, that power was not fear, that victory belonged to the one who refused to stop. And as the human clung to the beast's hide, as he drove his blade deeper, with every ounce of strength left, they knew they were seeing something that would echo through history. They knew they were seeing a story that would never be forgotten. And though the human's body was close to breaking, though his vision blurred, though his blood fell in heavy drops, his spirit burned brighter than fire, his will louder than the roar of the beast. And as he lifted his blade once more, climbing toward the monster's head, the entire arena understood that nothing could make him stop, nothing could make him fall, because the human refused to stop, and that refusal was the greatest strength of all. The arena was drowned in the roar of the beast, its cry filled with pain and fury, smoke pouring from its wounded jaws, fire spilling across the cracked stone floor, its massive body twisting and thrashing as it tried to throw the human free. But the human clung tighter, his torn hands gripping the monster's hide, his blade flashing again and again, cutting shallow wounds across its neck and shoulders, every strike small compared to the vast bulk of the beast, yet every strike carving deeper into the truth that even giants can bleed, even legends can fall. The crowd stood as one, thousands of voices trembling, some crying out in terror, others shouting in awe. Wings beat the air, claws scraped stone, antennae shivered, but none dared blink, none dared look away, for they knew the moment had come, the moment when fear itself would be tested, for the beast had always been the symbol of fear, the creature that ruled the trial, the monster that no one could overcome, and yet now a human, broken and bleeding, refused to yield before it. The council above leaned forward, their robes heavy with dust shaken loose from the trembling walls, their eyes fixed on the sight below, their whispers gone, their voices stolen by the weight of the scene, because they could see it too. They could see the truth revealed in every desperate motion. They could see that the human was not fighting only the beast. He was fighting the very idea that fear was stronger than will, and they knew deep inside that if he stood victorious, their world would never be the same again. The beast slammed itself against the walls, its claws ripping great chunks of stone free, sparks flying in showers, yet the human held on, his body battered with every impact, his ribs screaming, his arms trembling, his blood soaking his torn clothes. But still he climbed, step by step, gripping flesh and scale, dragging himself higher toward the monster's head, his blade dripping red, his teeth clenched with pain, his eyes burning with unbroken fire, and the crowd could feel his will. They could feel his defiance in every breath. The monster reared back, roaring at the sky, and the human seized the moment, climbing to its shoulders, crouched low against its thrashing bulk, gripping tight as flames burst from its jaws, and with one final surge of strength he raised his blade, his voice silent but his will thunderous, and he drove the steel deep into the thick flesh of its neck, driving with every ounce of strength left in his broken frame. And the beast shrieked with a cry so fierce that the heavens themselves seemed to tremble, its body staggering, its legs shaking, its great weight crashing into the cracked floor. The ground split as the beast fell, its claws tearing the earth in desperation, its tail smashing pillars into dust, the entire arena shaking as if the world itself would collapse, and the human clung to the embedded blade, his body jolted by the fall, his vision blurred, his breath heavy. But still he held on, refusing to let go, refusing to fall until the beast itself was finished. And as the dust rose like a storm cloud, the crowd leaned forward, hearts pounding, eyes wide, waiting for the truth of the end. The beast crashed to the ground, its roar breaking into silence, its body twitching, its flames dying into smoke, its eyes dimming like fading suns, and slowly, with a final shudder, the monster lay still, its bulk spread across the cracked stone, its power gone, its reign ended, and upon its massive body stood the human, his frame small against the mountain of flesh, his body broken but his spirit unshaken, his blade buried deep, his chest rising and falling in ragged breaths, yet his eyes, still blazing with defiance, and the silence of the arena turned into a storm of voices. The crowd erupted with cries that shook the very sky. Thousands of species who once mocked now cheered, who once pitted now roared in awe, their voices mixing into one endless thunder, their claws striking stone, their wings beating air, their voices carrying the truth across every corner of the arena, the truth that the impossible had been done, the beast had fallen, and it was not by the strongest, not by the largest, not by the fiercest, but by the human who refused to stop, by the fragile creature who had turned weakness into unbreakable strength. The council above sat frozen, their hands trembling, their eyes wide, for they understood the weight of this moment more than anyone. They understood that their sacred trial, their ancient tradition, their symbol of power and fear had been shattered, and they could not deny it. They could not turn away, because the truth stood before them in flesh and blood. The human had won. The human had shown them that will was greater than fear, that endurance was stronger than might, and that the smallest species could rise above the greatest monsters. The human staggered, his knees weak, his body trembling, his wounds heavy, yet he forced himself to stand upon the fallen beast, lifting his bloody blade high, his broken frame shaking, but his spirit blazing brighter than fire. And the crowd answered with a roar that echoed like thunder across the stars, for they knew this moment would never be forgotten. This story would never be silenced. The story of the human who stepped forward when all others hid. The story of the human who faced fear itself and emerged victorious. The elders lowered their heads, some in shame, some in awe, some in fear, for they knew that everything had changed, the balance of power, the meaning of courage, the weight of fear, all of it shattered by the will of one fragile creature. And though their pride resisted, though their hearts trembled, they could not deny the truth. From this day forward the name human would carry a weight beyond measure, for it was a name tied to victory against the unconquerable. It was a name tied to the end of fear. The human at last fell to his knees, his strength spent, his body collapsing upon the back of the slain beast, his blade slipping from his grasp, his chest heaving with shallow breaths, his vision dimming. But even in weakness he smiled, faint but fierce, a smile that carried the truth of his soul, the truth that he had not fought for glory, he had not fought for power. He had fought because no one else would. He had fought because surrender was not in his nature. He had fought because humanity was born to endure, and in that endurance lay their victory. The crowd would remember, the council would remember, the stars themselves would remember, that on this night the beast was slain, not by giants, not by warriors of legend, but by a human, and that victory would echo across the galaxies, whispered in halls, shouted in markets, carved into stone, sung in songs, for it was the night that fear was defeated, the night that courage rose, the night that the smallest stood against the greatest and proved that will is stronger than terror, that hope is stronger than despair, that humanity is stronger than fear. And so the arena that had once been a place of death, a place where legends fell, became the place of a new story, the place where the end of fear was written. And as the torches burned brighter, as the dust settled upon the broken ground, as the roar of the crowd filled the heavens, the human lay upon the fallen beast, broken but victorious, weak but unyielding, and all who watched knew the truth, that from this day forward no one would ever look at a human the same way again.